Welcome, my dear students of class 11 to this English class with me, your tutor Atinyo Sekose. And today we are going to take a look at your drama section, and the topic is The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. You would find it on page 97, chapter 10. So I am sure this author, that is Oscar Wilde, is not a new author to you, and I'm sure drama is also not a new thing for you. So we are going to cut to the chase, but for your understanding, we would discuss briefly a little bit about the author, and then we would move on to the lesson. So author's background here, Oscar Wilde, 1854 to 1900, he is known as a playwright and essayist. A playwright is a person who writes drama, and an essayist, a poet and a fiction writer as well. His novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray, is also a very famous one if you are interested to look it up. Now, what does his work reflect? His works critique the Victorian age. And again, the Victorian age is something that you are a little familiar with. Victorian age is referring to the reign when Queen Victoria was ruling England. 1837 to 1901, that is the period. So what era, or what era if you prefer, is this period? It is a period of prosperity. There is a lot of new things that were being introduced. In fact, it is also the period where there are old traditional values. At the same time, there is also the progress in modernity. So there is a lot of progress, as well as naturally there is a lot of changes that was happening in the cultural scenario, which moved towards modernism. Now, industrialization has also brought a lot of change, and this industrialization has also brought out a lot of class distinction or class structure within the society, and that is also an interesting element that we will be dealing with in the lesson, the importance of being earnest. Now, this is also a period of contradictions. People equated outward appearances with inward morality. People equate, in other words, people assume a different persona or different kinds of character in front of the public eye, but their inward, within the society itself, the society in fact upholds a lot of values, but within the small social structure, there was also a lot of immorality around that time. So naturally, Oscar Wilde is also criticizing that, and we would be also again, like I said, discussing about some of the main specific elements that he criticized in this lesson. Now, first of all, we need to understand the social context of, or the background of this lesson first, in order to comprehend fully what the characters meant or the flow of the story. So the setting here is naturally the Victorian age, emphasized on appearance in dress and manners above everything else. So it was also a period of a period of materialism, we can also say. And there was a lot of such show of outward appearances, even in terms of their dress and manners. And these manners is something that is important here, because we will be dealing again, coming back to that. Now, there is strict social code of conduct where morality was substituted for religion. In place of religion, they uphold a lot of moral values. And that is why people try to pretend to be very moral in public, but inward, there was a lot of immorality. Now, immorality beneath the outward appearance, that is what we find here. We have discussed about social hierarchy. When we say social hierarchy, due to the industrialization, we have learned that there arises a bourgeois or middle class society, and that's when the class distinctions took place. There is the upper class, middle class, and the lower class. It is a society of a patriarchal society. Remember, at this point of time, women were not enjoying a lot of freedom. Women's suffrage was not there. They were not given the right to vote yet. And so it was a very patriarchal society. So in that kind of a society, I'm sure you will be able to imagine how the society or the people or the constitutions of families move about. Now, here are the social or domestic context that is relevant to our lesson. we will be dealing with aristocracy. Now, at this point of time, we have understood the kind of background in that age, and it is an aristocratic period as well, we can see. And that is represented by the character Algernon. And Algernon, like many of the characters, Algernon is also representing aristocracy, who are the privileged lot and titled class of people, landowners and servants at their beck and calls. If you take a look at the play, it opens with Algernon and Lane. And here we understand that Lane has deep respect or deep loyalty for Algernon and so on. And that kind of people are the privileged people who are able to have lots of men servant in this case here, and to attend to them. So that is the privileged class of people that we are getting a glimpse at through the character of Algernon. Now, there is also total disassociation with lower class here. Taking the same example or the same scene here, the upper class people or the high class people are not at all in tune or in sync with the lower class people. In the dialogue between LG or Algernon for that matter and Lane, we understand that LG failed to understand the kind of marriage constitution that his servant lived in. Lower class people are to set examples. You know, remember he said that what kind of a marriage is he talking about if lower class of people are also separating? What kind of examples are being set? And this would be, again, further discussed in detail. So that is the social domestic context that we find here. So naturally, the setting, the actual setting of the play took place in London, England, and London here, the society, again, the society is a very refined, sensible society. In other words, remember, we are talking about outward appearances. They are very polite. They follow certain social etiquettes and so on. So, and again, we find that the setting is in London. It took place in a morning room in Algernon's flat in Half Moon Street. So that is the address. The play opens with the play opens with a dialogue between Algernon and Lane, and later on the introduction of the main character, that is Jack, or we can say Earnest. Now, what kind of a play is this? That's what we are going to discuss in order to help us understand the kinds of humor in the play. It is a comedy of manners, we can also say. And comedy, what is comedy of manners? Comedy of manners are written in such a way that it has a lot of witty dialogue. Remember, Oscar Wilde is trying to criticize that kind of outward appearances, making polite conversations, but at the same time, deep within, there is that immorality that we find. So he is criticizing that and using witty dialogue. So you would find that a lot of his script or a lot of the dialogues are actually famous quoted dialogues. I'll cite some examples here. Divorces are made in heaven. We always assume that marriage is made in heaven, but what he said here is very contradictory, and a very clever way. He said that divorce is made in heaven, which means that people are supposed to separate only after death. It is very vulgar to talk like a dentist, that kind of a clever talk, you know, instead of directly saying that it is not polite to talk at all, like you know everything, or like Mr. Know-it-all, he put it in that way. Now, the truth is rarely pure and simple. More than half of modern culture depends on what one shouldn't read. Again, criticizing the society. The society has set such a high moral standard for the people, and in the public, people are displaying such kind of moral code of conduct, but deep within, that kind of that moral values was not really being followed. That is what is being exposed here. So that's why he said that the society or the modern culture is such that there are lots of things, pros and cons, set down to be followed in public, but when it comes to, again, criticizing it in terms of what to read, personal things, one should decide instead of, or one should act instead of what the society believed in, if one has the conviction that it is right or wrong. In fact, that is what he is pointing out here, that modern culture depends on what one shouldn't read. Modern culture is such that there are so many set values, set principles set down for people to follow, and it even went to the extent of what one shouldn't read. For instance, in case of personal matters too, it interferes. So if you think about it, take the example of the novel or the children's book Harry Potter. When it was released, it created a lot of shocking thing in the society. People were against it and so on. Now, I'm not saying or suggesting here that I'm a big fan of Harry Potter series, but that is the case here. So maybe they are also facing a similar kinds of a situation at that point of time, because remember, this is the age of modernism. This is the transition age of modernism, and there was that deep feeling to hold on to old values, outdated values, at the same time the progress towards the modern civilization. Now, again, in a very clever way, literary criticism, talking about literary criticism, he said, is not your forte. You should leave that to people who haven't been to university. So maybe even at that point of time, people who are not at all learned, who had never been to university, gives a lot of criticism. So in this way, this is the dialogue of Algernon, and Algernon is very, in fact, you would find that in the entire play, you would find that most of his dialogues are very witty in nature, and that is the kind of character that he displayed. And he criticized that kind of a people who are not learned at all, but again, criticize other people, even though they are not well learned compared to people who went to the university. So even at that point of time, the taste of criticism or the literary criticism is being criticized. Remember, Oscar Wilde is giving a critic on the society. So these are the issues that he is addressing. And there is a lot of use of sarcasm and irony. We already know what is sarcasm and irony, so I would not go into detail here. So even the previous examples that we have just discussed are also elements of sarcasm and irony. Now, another element under comedy of manners is that contrived situations. What does it mean? Deliberate, artificial situations or persons. And you would find that when you read it, certain characters looked appeared and sound out of place. For instance, Lady Bracknell saying that Bunbury should die and that the shilly-shallying thing should stop, and so on. So that kind of a outrageous dialogue that is found here. And again, coming back to the contrived situations here, deliberate situations. Take the example of both the ladies, that is Cicely and Gwendolen, both vowed to marry a person only by the name of Earnest. Such kind of contrived situations are found in the play. Now remember that the play that we are dealing with here is only the first part of the Act 1, and it is very abridged. In fact, abridged. So I would request that if you get time, you can also read it. And there are also a lot of study materials and based on movie-based study material as well. So you can also try those things. But let's come back to the lesson that is under Comedy of Manners. The next thing here is critics of society. What exactly, or to make it narrowed it down into our lesson, Oscar Wilde is criticizing a lot of things in the society, that the Victorian society, we can say. But to narrow it down to our lesson, the main critic here is about marriage and the concept of love. So that is what we find here. So that is going to be important. So when we are discussing about marriage here, or when the characters are talking about marriage, I hope you would, when you are reading it, I hope you would take note of it and try to make sense, because that is his criticism against marriage or marriage constitution of that time. Now, there is also big contrast between urban and rural. Take the example of Jack or Ernest in the town complaining about the country life, that the neighbors are horrid and that he has a lot of responsibilities to carry it out in the country. And that is precisely the very excuse or the very thing why he had invented the fictitious character that is Earnest in order to go to London city and enjoy himself, be free from such kind of responsibilities. So that is what we have here. The urban class people, we can also say, or the urban scenario and the rural scenario. Got nice neighbors. Do you have nice neighbors? When Algernon asked him at Shropshire, perfectly horrid. That was his explanation. His responsibility as a guardian. Remember, he is the guardian of Sicily. And again, he is working his work is to do with maintaining peace, and so he had to keep up the pretense of a very highly moral person and who would never be a dishonest person. But if we think about it, here is the contrast here. He lied about his fictitious brother, that is Earnest, and on that pretext, he would go and visit the city. So that itself is a dishonesty that we find here. So there is that contrast that is being brought out in this manner. So the contrast here is, again, highlighting the fact that the society at that point of time were keeping so much with the outward appearances, but within the, like I said, within the domestic structure, there was also a lot of immorality. Now, these are the social etiquette of the day, and these are things that you need to remember in order to understand the play, why or how certain characters are behaving in such a way, or the progress of the story as well here. Now, at that point of the time, these are the social etiquette, and in fact, some are still relevant today. Refined mannerism is what we are talking about. After all, it's about comedy of manners. It is not polite to eavesdrop on conversation that does not concern you. In fact, that is why Lane said that I was not listening to the music when he was asked about his opinion on the music. That also reflects the ignorance of the lower class people who are not exposed to that kind of good taste, even in terms of art. One usually acts like one did not hear. That is also the social etiquette of the day when you come across conversations that has nothing to do with you. Lane, I didn't think it is polite to listen. That was what he said. A servant is expected to do as suggested, to do as ordered, we can say, and be loyal to the master. And this is an interesting facet that we would again discover more in the later class. Unless one is invited, one do not go visiting people. You know, remember in the conversation here, we find that send me an invitation. You are very careless with sending invitations and so on. And unless you get such kind of invitation, you are not entertained, or you are not supposed to go and visit people. Social calls here are referring to, social calls in fact are organized around the time called season, and this season is referring to the traditional time or traditional thing that is being observed, where people would throw big parties like balls and music for entertainment, witty conversation. So that is what we have here. Such kind of things are the form of entertainment for these people at that point of time. And so that is what we have here. Even a small tea party is organized in such a manner with extravagant displays. So that is why we find that Algernon is very fussy about whether the cucumber has arrived or not, and so on, in order to entertain the Lady Bracknell. Now, the best kind of wine or the best kind of food are served to the guest. It is very ungentlemanly thing to read a private cigarette case. What do we understand from here? The social etiquette here is that, in fact, this is even relevant today, that you are not supposed to go and check on people's personal belongings. And that is why this is also being brought out. For that matter, any personal, private matters, even take the example of diary. British humor is also, we need to understand here, British humor is such that it is a polite talk charged with a lot of sarcasm and irony. Now, public display of affection is considered to be scandalous, to create a lot of gossip. But what happened in the play is that married people are overdoing that, showing affection in front of people. So that is again being criticized, and we would find out more in the later class. Take the example of Mrs. Farquhar. Then we have the Algernon's seated arrangement of seat being seated next to a married woman always, and why he does not like to go to his aunt's party for that matter. So these are the cases. A bachelor is required, or for that matter, an unmarried woman, a lady, is required to be accompanied by social class, or to be accompanied by people who are in a polite conversation, and in order to avoid scandalous gossip things, in order to avoid a flirtatious kind of a behavior, they were being arranged in that manner. So that is again something that we would deal with later on. Then take the example of Cicely, who is under the ward of Mr. Worthing, or we can say here Jack or Ernest for that matter, and she is being given a very good quality education through her governors, and governors are people or teachers, we can say, who are employed in private household. So at that point of time, we can here understand that it is a very the social etiquettes and the social structure is such that the high class people or the upper class people are highly in great power, and we can also say that they exhibit a lot of theatrical behavior as well. So that would wrap up our comedy of manners for today. I hope you would take time to think about all those things, and then we would discuss the lesson more in detail. Thank you all very much for joining me.